Robert Jennings stared at his smartphone, the harsh glow illuminating his weathered face in the dimly lit living room of his Boston brownstone. Outside, autumn rain tapped against the windows, creating a melancholic backdrop to the hollowness spreading through his chest. "What do you mean I'm not in the group anymore?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of Margaret, his wife of 42 years, washing dishes in the kitchen. "I can see everyone else's messages from yesterday, but nothing new today," Robert continued, scrolling through the family chat one more time. The last message he could see was from his daughter Rebecca about her son's baseball game. After that, nothing. Margaret dried her hands on a kitchen towel and joined him on the sofa, the cushions sagging under their combined weight. "Maybe it's just a glitch," she offered, but her tone lacked conviction. Robert handed her the phone. "Check if you can see anything newer." Margaret took her reading glasses from where they hung on a chain around her neck and squinted at the screen. "There's nothing after Becca's message about Tyler's home run." Robert felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his recent heart issues. He'd founded Jennings Commercial Properties from nothing but determination and a small bank loan 40 years ago. He'd built it into one of the most respected, mid-sized commercial real estate firms in Massachusetts. He'd provided for his family, put both his children through college debt-free, and now, at 71, he couldn't even figure out if he'd been removed from a damn group chat. "Call Michael," he said, reaching for his blood pressure medication on the side table. Margaret hesitated. "It's nearly 10. He might be putting the kids to bed." "Call him anyway." With a sigh, Margaret dialed their son's number. After 3 rings, Michael's voicemail picked up. She left a brief message asking him to call back when he had a chance. "Try Rebecca," Robert instructed, swallowing his pill dry. Rebecca answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay? It's kind of late for you guys to be calling." Margaret put the phone on speaker. "Hi, sweetheart. Your father and I were just wondering about the family chat. We haven't seen any new messages today." A pause stretched over the line. "Oh," Rebecca finally said. You should probably talk to Michael about that." Robert leaned forward. "What's going on, Becca? Just tell us." Another pause. "Dad, remember that argument you had with Michael on Sunday? About Tyler's college fund?" Robert's jaw tightened. Of course he remembered. Michael had announced he was withdrawing money from his son's college fund, money Robert and Margaret had contributed to substantially, to invest in some blockchain startup. Robert had called it reckless. Michael had called him controlling and out of touch. "What about it?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. "Michael started a new group chat without you guys in it," Rebecca admitted reluctantly. "He said he was tired of your judgment and wanted a space where he could share things without getting a lecture." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret placed a hand on Robert's knee, but he barely felt it. "I see," he finally managed. "And you went along with this?" "Dad, "Never mind," Robert cut her off. "I understand. Good night, Rebecca." After Margaret ended the call, Robert sat motionless, staring at the dark television screen that reflected his and Margaret's silhouettes like ghosts. "He's just upset about the argument," Margaret offered. "You know Michael. He'll cool down in a few days." But Robert knew his son better than that. Michael had inherited his father's stubbornness, but none of his caution. At 43, he still made decisions with the impulsiveness of a teenager, decisions that affected not just him, but his wife and children. And now he'd drawn a line, making it clear where Robert stood in his life. "I'm going upstairs to look at those estate documents," Robert said, rising stiffly from the couch. "Robert, don't do anything rash," Margaret warned, concern etching deeper lines into her face. "I'm not," he replied, his voice now steady. "I'm being methodical, the way I've always been." In his home office, Robert unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a leather portfolio containing his will, trust documents, and power of attorney paperwork. His eyes lingered on the distribution of assets, the business he'd built, the properties he'd acquired, the investments he'd carefully cultivated over decades. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for a pen. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof like a timer counting down. If he doesn't want me in his digital life, Robert murmured to himself, then perhaps he doesn't need what I've spent my actual life building. He placed the documents back in the drawer without making any changes. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. The thought of revising his will, of removing Michael from what would be a substantial inheritance, no longer seemed like an overreaction. It felt like justice. As he closed the drawer, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dad, please don't take this personally. Michael's just going through some stuff. He loves you." Robert didn't reply. Instead, he turned off his phone and headed to bed, where he knew sleep would elude him. Tomorrow he would call his attorney, Harold Phillips. After 40 years of friendship and professional service, Harold would understand what needed to be done. What Michael had failed to realize was that digital connections were fleeting, but legal documents, those had permanence, and sometimes the most powerful response to being erased was to do some erasing of your own. The morning light filtered through the wooden blinds of Harold Phillips's office, casting alternating strips of brightness and shadow across the mahogany desk where Robert sat. The law firm occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Boston high-rise, offering impressive views of the harbor that neither man was paying attention to. "Let me get this straight, Bob," Harold said, removing his reading glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. "You want to significantly reduce Michael's inheritance because he removed you from a family text group." Robert shifted in the leather chair. "When you say it like that, it sounds petty." "Because it is petty," Harold replied, the bluntness of a 40-year friendship evident in his tone, "and not like you at all." The two men had met during Robert's first commercial property acquisition. Harold had been a young attorney then, hungry and meticulous. Now, with silver hair and reading glasses, he still maintained that meticulousness, along with an honesty that Robert both valued and occasionally resented. "It's not about the chat," Robert insisted, leaning forward. "It's about respect. It's about what this represents." Harold sighed, flipping through the current will on his desk. "You've always been deliberate, Bob. Calculated. That's why you're successful. So calculate this. What happens after you make this change? Have you thought 5 steps ahead like you usually do?" Outside the office window, a ferry cut through the harbor waters, leaving a clean white wake behind it. Robert watched it for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Michael has been making increasingly risky decisions," he finally said. "This college fund situation is just the latest. Did I tell you he refinanced his house last year to invest in cryptocurrency?" "No, you didn't," Harold replied, his eyebrows rising. "And now he's pulling from Tyler's college fund for another speculative investment. He's gambling with his family's security." Robert continued. "I built something that would last generations. What's the point if he's going to squander it?" Harold nodded slowly. "So this isn't really about the group chat." "The group chat is symbolic," Robert admitted. "It's about cutting me out of family decisions, dismissing my experience. If he doesn't value my input now, why should he benefit from my life's work later?" Harold leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "And what does Margaret think about this?" Robert's gaze dropped to his hands, spotted with age but still strong. "She thinks I should let it blow over. But she didn't build this business from nothing. She doesn't understand what it means to create something lasting." "With all due respect, Bob, that's bull," Harold said flatly. "Margaret supported you through every 16-hour workday, every missed dinner, every weekend at the office. She raised your children while you built that empire. She understands plenty." The truth of Harold's words stung, but Robert couldn't argue. Margaret had been his foundation, his constant, and she would be devastated if she knew he was here today. "What about Rebecca?" Harold asked. "Will you reduce her portion too? She's in the new chat." "No," Robert said quickly. "Rebecca was caught in the middle. She always is." "So just Michael then?" Harold confirmed, making a note. "How much do you want to reduce his share?" Robert hesitated. In his mind last night, he'd imagined cutting Michael out entirely. In the cold light of day, sitting across from Harold's questioning gaze, such severity felt excessive. Reduce his share of the business to 15% instead of 45%, Robert decided. The same for the property holdings. He'll still receive his portion of the liquid assets and investment accounts. Harold wrote this down, then looked up. And the lake house in New Hampshire. The one Michael has been eyeing since he was a teenager? Robert felt a twinge of guilt. Michael loved that house, the summer vacations, teaching his kids to fish off the dock, just as Robert had taught him. For a moment, Robert wavered. "Leave that as is," he finally said. "It goes to him as planned." Harold nodded, making another note. "I'll draft the changes, but I won't file anything yet." "Take a week to think about it." "I don't need a week, Bob," Harold insisted. "If you still want these changes after 7 days, I'll file the paperwork. But I've seen too many families torn apart by inheritance disputes. Once this bell is rung, it can't be unrung." As Robert left the law office, his phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Michael called. "Coming for dinner tonight. Please be home by 6. Robert's stomach tightened. He hadn't told Margaret about this meeting, and now Michael was coming over, perhaps to apologize or to escalate the rift. Either way, Robert wasn't prepared for the confrontation. He typed back, "We'll be there. Don't mention I was at Harold's today." Margaret's response was immediate. "What were you doing at Harold's?" Robert stared at the screen, then simply replied, "Tell you later." On the drive home, Robert took the longer route along the Charles River, trying to sort through his thoughts. Part of him wanted to call Harold and cancel the whole thing. Another part, the part that still smarted from being excluded, from having his expertise dismissed, wanted to go through with it. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Michael's Tesla already parked at the curb, earlier than expected. Robert sat in his car for a moment, watching through the living room window as Michael gesticulated while talking to Margaret. Even from here, Robert could see the tension in his son's posture. 5 steps ahead, Robert murmured to himself, recalling Harold's words. If he went through with changing the will, what would it accomplish? Would it teach Michael a lesson about respect and prudence? Or would it only confirm what Michael apparently already believed, that Robert was controlling, unable to let go? And what about Tyler and Emma, Michael's children? How would this affect his relationship with his grandchildren? Robert finally stepped out of his car, the weight of the decision still heavy on his shoulders. As he approached the front door, he reminded himself that unlike the impulsive creation of a new group chat, the changes to his will weren't yet finalized. He had a week to decide if this was really the path he wanted to take. But as he reached for the doorknob, he knew that the next hour might make that decision for him, one way or the other. The tension in the dining room was thick enough to cut with the sterling silver butter knife that lay unused beside Margaret's homemade rolls. Robert sat at the head of the table, Margaret to his right and Michael across from her. No one had touched the pot roast that had been Margaret's peace offering, Michael's favorite meal since childhood. "So," Robert finally said, breaking the suffocating silence, "you wanted to talk." Michael glanced at his mother, then back to his father. At 43, Michael still possessed the boyish good looks that had made him popular in high school, the Jennings jawline, the clear blue eyes. But tonight, exhaustion shadowed his features. "Mom says you're upset about being removed from the family chat," Michael began, his tone carefully neutral. Robert set down his water glass. "I'm upset about what it represents." "Dad!" "Let me finish," Robert said, holding up a hand. "For 50 years, I've made decisions based on what's best for this family. I built a business to provide security for all of us. I've seen economic cycles come and go. I've weathered recessions, market crashes, and housing bubbles, so when I express concern about you taking money from Tyler's college fund for some blockchain venture, it's not because I'm out of touch. It's because I've seen too many sure things turn into nothing." Michael's jaw tightened. "Cryptocurrency and blockchain technology are the future of finance. You're not seeing the bigger picture." "No, you're not seeing the bigger picture," Robert countered, his voice rising despite his intention to stay calm. "The bigger picture is your responsibility to your family, to provide stability. That's exactly what I'm trying to do." Michael's fist hit the table, causing the silverware to jump. "I'm trying to build something that will secure their future, just like you did. By gambling with their college money," Robert scoffed. "It's not gambling when you understand the technology." Michael insisted. But you never wanted to understand. You've dismissed every new idea I've ever brought to you. Margaret placed a hand on Robert's arm. Perhaps we could discuss this without accusations. Michael laughed bitterly. That's rich, considering Dad went to his lawyer today. What was that about, Dad? Changing your will already? Robert felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Margaret, who appeared equally shocked. How did you know I saw Harold today? Robert asked. Boston's not that big, Dad. Harold's son plays golf with my client Jeremy. They saw us at the restaurant next door to Harold's office. Michael's eyes narrowed. So it's true then. You're changing your will because of a stupid group chat. Margaret turned to Robert, hurt and confusion clouding her eyes. Robert, is that true? The room spun slightly as Robert grappled with being caught. He'd planned to tell Margaret tonight after Michael left. He'd planned to explain his reasoning calmly to help her understand. I went to discuss options, Robert admitted finally. Nothing's been filed yet. Options? Michael repeated incredulously. What options? Cutting me out? Punishing me for wanting some space from your constant criticism? Michael, that's enough, Margaret interjected. Your father wouldn't he? Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He's been holding the business over my head my entire life. Someday, this will all be yours if you don't mess it up. That's been the subtext of every conversation since I was 18. Robert also rose to his feet, anger burning through his initial shock. That business was supposed to be your legacy. I offered you a position right out of college, but you chose to go your own way. Fine. But don't expect me to sit back and watch while you make reckless decisions with your children's future. My children are none of your concern, Michael shouted. Stop it, both of you! Margaret's voice cut through the argument with unexpected force. Both men turned to her in surprise. Margaret rarely raised her voice. Sit down, now! Chastened, they both returned to their seats. Margaret looked between them, her expression a mixture of disappointment and determination. 50 years of marriage, and you still think you can hide things from me, Robert? She shook her head. And you, Michael, removing your father from the family group was childish and hurtful. Mom, I'm not finished, she said firmly. Robert, changing your will without discussing it with me is a betrayal I never expected from you. And Michael, whatever financial decisions you're making, keeping your parents in the dark only breeds suspicion and worry. She took a deep breath. This family is falling apart over pride and stubbornness. The very traits that made you successful, Robert, and that you passed to your son, are now tearing us apart. The three sat in uncomfortable silence, the pot roast growing cold between them. Outside, a car alarm briefly sounded and then went quiet, the urban soundtrack continuing unaffected by the drama unfolding inside the Jennings home. I didn't go through with it, Robert finally said, his voice subdued. Harold advised me to wait a week. Small comfort, Michael muttered. But you were going to, Margaret pressed. What exactly were you planning, Robert? Robert couldn't meet her eyes. Reducing Michael's share of the business and property holdings, not eliminating it entirely? Michael laughed humorlessly. Generous of you. The lake house would still have gone to you, Robert added, as if this might soften the blow. Michael stared at his father, genuine hurt replacing anger in his expression. You know what hurts the most? Not that you'd change your will. It's that you think I care more about the inheritance than about having a relationship with you. He shook his head. You really believe that's all that matters to me? Your actions suggest otherwise, Robert replied. Taking risks with Tyler's future. It wasn't Tyler's entire college fund, Michael interrupted. It was 20%, a calculated risk with money that has years to recover if things go south, which they won't. The rest is in stable investments. Did you ever bother to ask for those details? Robert blinked, taken aback. You never mentioned... Because you never gave me the chance, Michael said. You heard blockchain and immediately assumed I was being irresponsible, just like you did when I chose marketing over real estate, when I bought the Tesla instead of the Lexus you recommended, when Emma wanted to go to art school instead of business school. Margaret reached across the table and took Michael's hand. Why didn't you tell us about your investment strategy instead of shutting us out? Michael's shoulders sagged. What's the point? Dad made up his mind about me years ago. I'm the impulsive son who'll never measure up to the great Robert Jennings. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Is that really how Michael saw their relationship? As a constant evaluation he could never pass? That's not true, Robert said, but even to his own ears, the denial sounded hollow. Isn't it? Michael challenged. When was the last time you told me you were proud of me? Not of something I accomplished, of me? Robert opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He couldn't remember. I'm leaving, Michael said, standing again. Mom, thanks for trying to fix this, but some things can't be fixed with pot roast, no matter how good it is. Michael, please, Margaret began, but he was already heading for the door. I'll add you both back to the family chat, he said without turning around. Not that it matters now. The front door closed with a decisive click, not quite a slam, but definitive nonetheless. Through the dining room window, Robert watched his son get into his car and drive away, the taillights disappearing around the corner. Margaret sat perfectly still, looking at her husband with an expression he'd never seen before, a mixture of sadness and something that looked unsettlingly like pity. 50 years, she said softly, and I just realized I don't know you as well as I thought I did. She stood and began clearing the untouched plates, leaving Robert alone at the head of the table, the patriarch of a family that was splintering before his eyes. The inheritance that had seemed so important this morning now felt meaningless compared to what he stood to lose, what he might have already lost. Robert reached for his phone and pulled up Harold's contact information. His finger hovered over the call button. 5 steps ahead, Harold had said, but Robert now realized he hadn't been thinking ahead at all. He'd been reacting from hurt pride, and in doing so, he might have damaged something far more valuable than any business or property he could ever leave behind. 3 days had passed since the disastrous dinner, and Robert hadn't spoken to Michael. He'd called Harold the morning after and definitively cancelled any changes to the will, but the damage had been done. The knowledge that Robert had even considered altering Michael's inheritance hung between them like an invisible wall. Robert sat in his office at Jennings Commercial Properties, staring blankly at quarterly reports that would normally command his full attention. The downtown Boston office hummed with activity outside his door, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the occasional burst of laughter from the break room. But inside, silence reigned. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, straightening in his chair. Rebecca entered, closing the door behind her. At 39, his daughter had always been the peacemaker of the family, the steady one who balanced Michael's impulsiveness and Robert's stubbornness. Today, her expression was serious, her normally warm brown eyes, Margaret's eyes, clouded with concern. "Dad," she greeted him, taking a seat across from his desk. "We need to talk," Robert sighed. "Your mother sent you." "No," Rebecca replied. "Though she's worried sick about both of you. I came because Tyler called me last night. He's upset." Robert frowned. "Tyler? Why?" "Because his father is upset," Rebecca explained patiently. "And because he overheard Michael telling Angela that you tried to cut him out of your will. Now Tyler thinks his grandfather hates his dad." Robert winced. Tyler, at 14, was at that age where family dynamics took on outsized importance. The thought of his grandson believing such a thing made Robert's chest ache. "That's not what happened," he protested weakly. Rebecca's eyebrow arched in a perfect imitation of Margaret's skeptical look. "Isn't it? Michael may have exaggerated, but you did go to Harold." Robert couldn't deny it. He turned to look out the window at the Boston skyline, buildings he knew intimately, some of which his company had helped develop over the decades. The city had changed so much during his career, skyline constantly evolving, yet some landmarks remained steadfast, like family should. "I made a mistake," he admitted, the words difficult to push past his pride. "I was hurt and angry." "I know," Rebecca said, her tone softening. "And Michael was wrong to remove you from the group chat. It was childish. He added us back." Robert noted, but no one's posted anything since. Because everyone's waiting to see what you'll do, Rebecca explained. Dad, you've always been the center of this family, the rock. When you're upset, everyone feels it. Gee, Robert turned back to his daughter. What do you expect me to do? Apologize? I didn't actually change the will, but you thought about it, Rebecca pointed out. And more importantly, you didn't trust Michael enough to have a real conversation about his investment decisions before jumping to conclusions. She leaned forward. Do you know what Michael's blockchain venture actually is? Robert had to admit he didn't. He'd heard blockchain and immediately dismissed it as another cryptocurrency scheme. It's a platform that helps small businesses verify supply chain ethics, Rebecca explained. It ensures products are sourced sustainably and without exploitation. He's partnering with an MIT professor who specializes in ethical technology. They've already secured pilot programs with 3 retail chains. Robert blinked in surprise. I didn't know that. Because you didn't ask, Rebecca said simply. You assumed he was being reckless, just like you've always assumed. The accusation stung because it contained more than a grain of truth. Robert had always seen Michael as the risk-taker, the one who needed guidance and control. Even as Michael entered middle age, Robert had never fully accepted that his son might actually know what he was doing. Michael should have explained, Robert said, a last defense. He tried at Sunday dinner 2 weeks ago, Rebecca reminded him. You cut him off and started lecturing about internet money before he could get into the details. Robert remembered the exchange differently, but the possibility that Rebecca was right made him uncomfortable. Had he become so set in his ways that he couldn't even listen to his own son? I may have been hasty in my judgment, he conceded. Rebecca nodded, accepting this partial admission. There's something else you should know. Michael turned down a buyout offer last month. His prototype platform attracted attention from a major tech company. They offered him $7 million. Robert's eyebrows shot up. $7 million, and he turned it down? Because he believes in what he's building, Rebecca said. Sound familiar? Isn't that exactly what you did when Landmark Properties tried to acquire Jennings Commercial in '98? The parallel was undeniable. Robert had rejected an offer that at the time had seemed extraordinarily generous because he believed his company had greater potential. Margaret had supported his decision despite the security that immediate payout would have provided. The gamble had paid off. The company was now worth 5 times that offer. He's more like you than either of you want to admit, Rebecca continued. Stubborn, passionate, committed to his vision. The only difference is his vision involves technology you don't understand, so you assume it's inferior to your approach. Robert wanted to argue but found he couldn't. The evidence of his bias was too clear, laid out so plainly by his perceptive daughter. What do you suggest I do? He asked finally. Talk to him, Rebecca said. Really talk to him. Listen more than you speak. And maybe, she hesitated. Maybe what? Maybe visit his office, she suggested. See what he's building firsthand. Let him show you his world, instead of always expecting him to exist in yours. The idea made Robert uncomfortable. He prided himself on being knowledgeable, competent. Walking into Michael's tech startup would place him on unfamiliar ground, where his expertise meant little. The vulnerability of that position was unappealing. I'll think about it, he said non-committally. Rebecca stood, disappointment evident in her posture. Think quickly, Dad. Pride is expensive, and you're not the only one paying the price. After she left, Robert sat motionless, her words echoing in his mind. Outside his window, clouds gathered, darkening the autumn sky. A storm was coming, both literally and figuratively. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Jennings, your wife is on line 1, his assistant announced. Robert picked up the phone. Margaret! Robert! Her voice was tight with emotion. I just got a call from Emma's school. She's in the nurse's office. Apparently, she had some kind of anxiety attack during math class. Robert stood immediately, reaching for his coat. Is she all right? Should I meet you there? The nurse says she's calmer now. I'm heading over. Margaret paused. Robert, When the nurse asked what was bothering her, Emma said she was worried about her family falling apart. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Emma, his sensitive 11-year-old granddaughter, was having anxiety attacks because of the rift he'd helped create. "I'll meet you at the school," he said, his decision made. "And Margaret, I'm going to fix this." An hour later, Robert sat in his car outside the converted warehouse in Cambridge that housed Michael's company, Verity Chain. The rain had started, pelting the windshield in sheets that matched his turbulent mood. Emma had been collected from school, physically fine, but emotionally fragile. The worry in her young eyes had cemented Robert's resolve. He stepped out into the downpour, not bothering with an umbrella. By the time he reached the building's entrance, his overcoat was soaked through. The lobby directory listed Verity Chain on the 3rd floor. As the elevator climbed, Robert rehearsed what he might say, but all his prepared phrases felt inadequate. The elevator doors opened to reveal an open-concept office space with exposed brick walls, standing desks, and large monitors displaying code and graphics Robert couldn't begin to decipher. Young people in casual clothes moved purposefully between workstations or gathered in small groups around whiteboards filled with diagrams. At the center of this activity stood Michael, gesturing animatedly as he explained something to a small group. He looked energized, confident, completely in his element in a way Robert had rarely seen before. A young woman approached Robert. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Michael Jennings," Robert said, water dripping from his coat onto the polished concrete floor. "I'm his father." Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Oh, Mr. Jennings, of course. Michael's mentioned you. Let me just—" "Dad!" Michael had spotted him and was now walking over, surprise evident on his face. "What are you doing here?" Robert suddenly felt foolish, standing there dripping wet, an old man in a young person's world. But Emma's worried face flashed in his mind, strengthening his resolve. "I came to see your operation," he said simply. "If you have time to show me." Michael studied him for a moment, as if searching for the catch. "Now? Unless it's a bad time," Robert hedged, already regretting his impulsive visit. Something shifted in Michael's expression, wariness giving way to cautious hope. "No, it's a good time. Let me get you a towel first." As Michael led him through the office, Robert noticed the respectful nods from employees, the easy way Michael introduced him to key team members. His son was clearly respected here, a leader in his own right. In a conference room with glass walls, Michael handed him a company-branded towel and waited as Robert dried his face and hair. "Emma had an anxiety attack at school today," Robert said without preamble. "She's worried about our family falling apart." Michael's face fell. "Is she okay?" "Physically, yes. Your mother's with her now." Robert set the damp towel aside. "But I realized something when I heard. This thing between us, it's affecting everyone. Tyler, Emma, your mother, Rebecca, we can't keep going like this." Michael nodded slowly. "I agree." "I was wrong," Robert continued, the words difficult but necessary. "I jumped to conclusions about your investment. I didn't listen. And I betrayed your trust by considering changes to the will." Michael seemed stunned by the admission. "I didn't expect that." "Expect what?" "You admitting you were wrong," Michael said honestly. "That's not exactly your strong suit, Dad." Robert managed a small smile. "I'm trying something new." A moment of understanding passed between them, fragile but real. "Do you want to see what we're working on?" Michael offered. "I'd like that," Robert replied. "I may not understand all of it, but I want to try." As Michael began explaining his platform, the ethical supply chain verification, the transparency it created, the potential to transform how businesses operated, Robert found himself genuinely impressed. The technology might be unfamiliar, but the business fundamentals were sound. Michael had indeed been thinking 5 steps ahead. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Robert wasn't listening as a father evaluating his son's choices. He was listening as one businessman to another. And what he heard gave him hope, not just for Michael's venture, but for the possibility of building a new kind of relationship with his son, one based on mutual respect, rather than authority and rebellion. Outside, the storm continued, But inside, the atmosphere had begun to clear. They still had much to discuss, many hurts to address, but this was a start. And sometimes, Robert reflected, a start was all you needed to change course. The offices of Jennings Commercial Properties hummed with unusual energy on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Conference Room A, normally reserved for high-profile client meetings, had been commandeered for a different purpose. Robert sat at the head of the glossy mahogany table, with Harold Phillips to his right and Margaret to his left. Michael and Rebecca occupied seats across from them, with Angela, Michael's wife, beside him. 6 laptops were open, spreadsheets and documents displayed on their screens. The remains of a catered lunch sat pushed to one side of the table. They'd been at this for hours, and Robert's back ached from the prolonged sitting, but determination kept him engaged. "So, to summarize," Harold said, adjusting his reading glasses, "we're restructuring not just the inheritance plan, but the business transition strategy as well." Robert nodded. "That's right. I've been holding too tightly to the reins for too long." Michael looked up from his laptop, surprise still evident in his expression, despite the weeks of improved relations. Ever since Robert's impromptu visit to Verity Chain 3 weeks ago, they'd been carefully rebuilding their relationship, but Michael remained wary, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Michael asked. "Bringing Verity Chain under the Jennings Group umbrella is a major step. We could just continue as separate entities." Robert shook his head. "The synergy makes sense. Your blockchain platform for ethical supply verification complements our commercial real estate operations. Developers are increasingly concerned with ethical sourcing for materials. This positions both companies for the future." Rebecca, who had been quietly taking notes, interjected. "The structure makes sense financially as well. By creating the Jennings Group as a parent company with both businesses as subsidiaries, we maintain the distinct operations while allowing for resource sharing and tax efficiencies." Robert felt a surge of pride at his daughter's sharp analysis. With her MBA and background in finance, Rebecca had always had a keen mind for business structures. She'd recently been promoted to CFO at her investment firm, a fact that Robert had celebrated with perhaps more enthusiasm than he'd shown for any of Michael's accomplishments. That imbalance was something he was trying to correct. "What Rebecca said," Robert agreed. "But more importantly, it acknowledges what I should have recognized years ago, that this family has multiple talents and visions, all of which deserve respect and support." Angela, who had remained mostly quiet during the meeting, looked up from her notes. As a corporate attorney, she had been invaluable in helping structure the new arrangement. "There's still the question of management transition. Robert, you've indicated you're not ready to fully retire yet." "No," Robert confirmed. "At 71, I'm not ready for the rocking chair, but I am ready to step back from day-to-day operations." He looked at Michael. "If you're willing to come aboard as Chief Innovation Officer for the group, while maintaining your CEO role at Verity Chain." Michael's eyebrows rose. "Chief Innovation Officer? That's not a role we've discussed before." "Because I just created it," Robert admitted. "Harold and I were talking last night, and it struck me what this company needs isn't just a succession plan. It needs evolution. Fresh thinking." Margaret reached over and squeezed Robert's hand, a small gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the others at the table. She'd been his greatest ally in this transformation, pushing him when his resolve faltered, reminding him of the bigger picture when pride threatened to reassert itself. "I'm not asking you to abandon what you've built," Robert continued. "Verity Chain remains your primary focus, but your perspective could help position Jennings Commercial for the next decade. Technology integration, ethical practices, modern workplace culture, these are areas where we're behind the curve." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying his father with new eyes. "A few weeks ago, you were ready to reduce my inheritance because you thought I was being reckless with technology investments. Now, you want me to help modernize your company. Your company too, if you accept," Robert corrected. "And yes, I've done a lot of thinking since then." He cleared his throat. uncomfortable with the vulnerability but pushing through it. I was wrong, Michael. Not just about your business acumen, but about my approach to family and legacy. The room fell silent. Robert Jennings admitting he was wrong was still a novelty that commanded attention. The incident with the family chat being removed. It hurt more than I expected, Robert continued. It made me realize how much I'd taken for granted. The right to be involved in your lives, to have my opinion valued. When that was withdrawn, I reacted badly. We both did, Michael acknowledged. The new chat was childish on my part. Robert shook his head. Your reaction was understandable given years of my, let's call it what it was, controlling behavior. The change to the will, though, even considering it crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Harold shifted uncomfortably beside him. As the family's attorney and Robert's friend, he'd been caught in the middle of the conflict, obligated to follow Robert's instructions while personally disapproving of them. Which is why we're here today, Robert continued, not just to restructure the business, but to rebuild trust, to create something together, rather than me simply handing something down. Rebecca, ever practical, redirected the conversation back to specifics. Let's talk about board composition for the new parent company. For the next hour, they worked through details, board seats, voting rights, operational autonomy for each subsidiary. Robert found himself genuinely valuing Michael's input on modernizing governance structures, while Michael seemed to appreciate Robert's experience with navigating complex business relationships. They disagreed on several points, but managed to do so respectfully, finding compromise positions that incorporated the best of both perspectives. When they finally took a break, Robert stepped out onto the office balcony for some fresh air. The Boston skyline stretched before him, buildings glowing in the late afternoon sun. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Angela joining him. "This view never gets old," she commented, leaning against the railing beside him. "One of the perks of building a company," Robert replied. "Securing the best views." Angela smiled, but remained quiet for a moment before speaking again. "I want to thank you, Robert." "For what?" "For this." She gestured back toward the conference room. "For meeting Michael halfway. I've watched him struggle with your relationship for years. The constant feeling that he couldn't measure up, that his path wasn't valid in your eyes." Robert winced. "I never intended to make him feel that way." "I know," Angela said gently, "but intention and impact are different things. What matters is that you're fixing it now." She paused. "Tyler asked me yesterday if you and Michael were friends again." That's how he put it. Robert smiled at the simplicity of a 14-year-old's perspective. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were working on it," Angela replied, "that sometimes adults make things more complicated than they need to be." "Wise woman," Robert nodded, "and a good attorney. Michael's lucky to have you in his corner." "We're all on the same side now," Angela pointed out. "That's what family should be." When they returned to the conference room, Harold was reviewing the final points with Margaret, Rebecca, and Michael. Robert took his seat, feeling more at peace than he had in months. "I think we've covered everything except the family lake house," Harold noted, glancing at his checklist. "Robert, you indicated you wanted to address that separately." Robert nodded. "The lake house doesn't go into the business restructuring. It stays as personal property." He looked at Michael. "As we discussed before, it will transfer to you eventually, but I'd like to make one change." Michael tensed slightly. "What change?" "I'd like to transfer ownership now, not after I'm gone," Robert said, "with one condition, that it remains available for family gatherings. Thanksgiving, summer vacations, the traditions we've built there." Michael stared at him in disbelief. "You want to give me the lake house now? Dad, that's your favorite place." "It is," Robert agreed, "which is why I'll still expect an open invitation." He smiled slightly. "But it's time to acknowledge that the next generation should be the stewards of those memories going forward." Margaret, who hadn't been briefed on this particular decision, wiped away a tear. "Robert." "It's the right thing, Margaret," he said softly. "Remember how Michael used to take Tyler fishing off the dock the same way I taught him? Emma's already showing interest in sailing. The place should be in the hands of someone who'll be there to teach her. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The lake house had always been Robert's personal sanctuary, the one place where he truly relaxed and left business behind. Transferring it now, while he was still active and healthy, represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed legacy, not as something to be bestowed posthumously, but as a living transition, a collaboration, rather than a bequest. Michael seemed genuinely moved. "Thank you. We'll honor that place the way you and Mom always have." Harold, ever the practical attorney, made a note. "I'll draft the transfer documents. Should we include Rebecca in the ownership structure?" Robert looked to Michael, leaving the decision to him. Another small but significant transfer of authority. "Yes," Michael said without hesitation. "Equal ownership between us, with our children as eventual inheritors. The lake house should always belong to the whole family." Rebecca nodded her agreement, reaching across the table to squeeze her brother's hand briefly. Harold collected his papers. "I think we're done here, unless anyone has other matters to discuss." When no one spoke up, Robert rose to his feet. "Thank you all. This means more than I can properly express." He hesitated, then added, "I've spent a lifetime building things. Buildings, a company, investments. But I nearly forgot that the most important thing I helped build was this family. I'm grateful for the reminder, even if it came in a painful way." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Robert noticed Michael lingering, waiting until the others had stepped out. "Dad," Michael began, "there's one more thing we haven't discussed." "What's that?" Michael pulled out his phone. "The family chat. Mom mentioned you never post anything, even though I added you back weeks ago." Robert chuckled. "I'm still figuring out all those emoji things your mother uses. Never sure which one is appropriate." "Maybe start with something simple," Michael suggested, "like letting everyone know about today." Robert considered this. The family group chat had been the catalyst for their conflict, but perhaps it could also be a symbol of reconciliation. "Show me how to do one of those voice message things," Robert decided. "Some things are better said than typed." Michael showed him the button to hold for voice recording. Robert pressed it and spoke from the heart. "Family meeting went well today. Big changes coming. Good ones. Lake house gathering this weekend to celebrate? Your old man is buying steaks for the grill." Michael sent the message, and within seconds, responses began flooding in. Thumbs-up emojis from Tyler, excited messages from Emma about swimming, despite the October chill, practical questions from Rebecca about timing. As they walked out together, Robert realized that the true legacy he would leave behind wasn't contained in legal documents or business structures. It lived in moments like this, a family reconnecting, evolving, forgiving. The inheritance that mattered most couldn't be removed with a stroke of a pen, because it had already been given. Values, memories, relationships. Those were the things worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth changing for. And unlike the family chat, there was no way to be removed from that inheritance. It was already an inseparable part of who they all were. 1 year later, the Jennings Lake House in New Hampshire bustled with activity on a perfect July afternoon. American flags and red, white, and blue bunting decorated the wraparound porch, left over from their 4th of July celebration 3 days earlier. The scent of charcoal and grilling meat wafted across the property, mingling with the clean pine air and the distinctive freshwater smell of the lake. Robert sat in his favorite Adirondack chair on the dock, watching Tyler and his friend Jason attempt to paddleboard across the cove. At 15, Tyler had shot up several inches in the past year, all gangly limbs and newfound awkwardness. He'd fallen into the water twice already, each time emerging with laughter and determined to try again. "He reminds me of you at that age," Margaret said, settling into the chair beside Robert's. She handed him a glass of iced tea. "All persistence, no patience." Robert smiled, accepting the drink. "Poor kid. Let's hope he got your common sense to balance it out." From the house came the sound of Emma's laughter, followed by Rebecca calling something about setting the table for dinner. The lake house had become the heart of family gatherings again, just as Robert had hoped when he transferred ownership to Michael and Rebecca. The past year had seen birthdays, holidays, and impromptu weekend getaways that brought various combinations of family members together under its roof. "Have you seen the presentation Michael prepared?" Margaret asked, adjusting her sun hat against the late afternoon glare off the water. "Not yet," Robert replied. "He's being mysterious about it, says he wants everyone to see it together." Tonight's gathering was special, the one-year anniversary of the formation of the Jennings Group. What had begun as a peace offering, a restructuring meant to heal family wounds, had flourished into something none of them had fully anticipated. The synergy between Jennings Commercial Properties and Verity Chain had proven more valuable than even Robert's optimistic projections. "Robert, come help with this ridiculous grill." Michael's voice called from the stone patio, where he was battling with the new oversized grill he'd insisted on purchasing for the lake house. "It's got more controls than my first car." Robert chuckled and rose from his chair. "Duty calls." As he approached the patio, he could see Michael studying the grill's control panel with the intense concentration he applied to complex coding problems. Angela stood nearby, amusement playing across her features as she sipped a glass of wine. "Having trouble with analog technology?" Robert teased, joining his son. Michael looked up with a self-deprecating smile. "I can build a blockchain platform that processes thousands of transactions per second, but apparently a propane grill is beyond my capabilities." "That's because you're overthinking it," Robert said, reaching for the ignition. "Sometimes the simplest approach works best." Together, they got the grill started, adjusting the heat to the perfect temperature for the steaks that were marinating in the kitchen. It was a small moment of collaboration, unremarkable on its surface, but representative of how their relationship had evolved. Mutual respect, complementary skills, neither assuming superiority over the other. "The Boston Chronicle called yesterday," Michael mentioned casually as they watched the grill heat up. "They want to do a feature on the Jennings Group. Family business reimagined or something like that." Robert raised an eyebrow. "What did you tell them?" "I said I'd discuss it with you and Rebecca," Michael replied. "Thought it might be good visibility for both companies, but I know how you feel about publicity." A year ago, Robert might have immediately dismissed the idea, protective of the family's privacy and wary of media attention. Now he considered it thoughtfully. Could be valuable, especially as we launch the new sustainability initiative. "Let's see what Rebecca thinks." Michael nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. They both knew how far they'd come, from Robert's unilateral decision-making to this new collaborative approach. Later, as the extended family gathered around the long farmhouse table on the screened porch, Robert took a moment to absorb the scene. Margaret, at one end of the table, chatting with Angela about the garden they'd started together behind the lake house. Rebecca's husband, David, discussing fishing spots with Tyler, Emma showing her latest art project to her cousin Lily, Michael uncorking wine bottles, while Rebecca arranged the last of the side dishes. This was what mattered, this noisy, imperfect, loving collection of people connected by blood and choice. Not the business empire he'd built, not the properties or investments, though those had their place in providing security and opportunity. But they were means, not ends. "Before we dig in," Michael said, standing at his end of the table, "I wanted to share something with everyone." He pulled out his tablet and tapped a few commands. The large TV screen on the porch wall flickered to life, displaying a polished presentation titled Jennings Group Year 1. "Oh no, are we doing quarterly reports at dinner now?" Tyler groaned dramatically. "Hush," Angela admonished gently. "Your father worked hard on this." Michael clicked through the first few slides. Impressive growth charts, client acquisition metrics, sustainability impact data. Robert felt pride swelling as he saw the tangible results of their combined efforts. Jennings Commercial Properties had indeed benefited from Michael's technological expertise and fresh perspective, while Verity Chain had leveraged Robert's decades of business relationships and credibility in ways that accelerated its growth. "These numbers are impressive," Robert commented as Michael paused between slides. The ethical supply chain certification program has expanded faster than we projected, Michael nodded. Having your reputation behind it opened doors we might have spent years trying to access otherwise. Rebecca leaned forward. The diversification into green building materials through the joint venture is outperforming our initial estimates as well. But that's not what I really wanted to show everyone, Michael said, clicking to a new slide. This is. The screen changed to display a simple family tree diagram, but instead of names and birth dates, it showed connections between people and key values or contributions. Robert saw his name linked to foundation and perseverance, Margaret's to heart and wisdom, Michael's to innovation and vision, Rebecca's to balance and strategy. Even the grandchildren had their places, Tyler connected to energy and Emma to creativity. This is the real Jennings Group, Michael explained, his voice softening. Not the corporate structure or the balance sheets, but this web of relationships and values that make everything else possible. Robert felt Margaret's hand find his under the table, squeezing gently. A year ago, Michael continued, we were falling apart. A stupid group chat and wounded pride nearly cost us everything that matters. He looked directly at Robert. Dad, you took the first step toward healing when you showed up at my office that rainy day. You chose family over pride, relationship over control. Robert swallowed against the unexpected tightness in his throat. So, this presentation isn't really about business metrics, though those are nice, Michael smiled. It's about celebrating what we rebuilt together. Trust, respect, and a family legacy that's living rather than just something written in legal documents. Here, David raised his glass in a toast, and others followed suit. As they ate dinner, conversation flowed easily between business topics and family matters, the arbitrary boundary between them having dissolved over the past year. Robert noticed how naturally leadership shifted around the table, Michael taking point on technology discussions, Rebecca on financial strategies, Angela on legal considerations, and himself on client relationships and industry history. No one person dominated. Each voice was valued for its unique perspective. After dinner, as twilight settled over the lake, Robert found himself alone in the boathouse, ostensibly checking on the fishing gear, but really just seeking a moment of quiet reflection. The wooden structure, with its familiar smells of cedar and lake water, had always been his thinking place. Hiding out. Michael's voice came from the doorway. Robert turned with a smile. Just taking a moment. Your presentation was something special. Michael stepped inside, hands in his pockets. I meant every word of it. I know, Robert nodded. That's what made it special. Michael leaned against a wooden post, studying his father in the fading light. You know what I realized recently? When I was a kid, I thought being like you meant doing exactly what you did, running the same business, making the same choices. I spent years rebelling against that, trying to forge my own path. And you did, Robert acknowledged. Yes, but here's the irony, Michael continued. In creating something completely different from your business, I ended up being more like you than I ever imagined. The drive, the vision, the willingness to take calculated risks on something I believed in. I inherited those qualities whether I wanted to or not. Robert chuckled. I'd say you got the best parts and improved on them. Your ethical focus, your collaborative leadership style. Those are advancements on the foundation. Michael picked up one of the fishing lures on the workbench, turning it over in his hands. Remember teaching me to tie these? I must have been 9 or 10. You were 8, Robert corrected. You had more patience for it than I expected. Sat here for hours getting it right. I still have the first one I made correctly, Michael admitted. And kept it in my desk through college, then every office I've had since. Robert hadn't known that, and the revelation touched him deeply. Really? Michael nodded. Some connections can't be broken, Dad. Not by group chats or arguments or even wills. They're woven into who we are. He set the lure down carefully. That's what I've been trying to tell Tyler lately. He's worried about choosing the right path, feeling pressure to have it all figured out. What advice are you giving him? Robert asked, curious about his son's parenting philosophy. That the path matters less than how you walk it, Michael said. That integrity, passion, and consideration for others will serve him well regardless of what career he chooses. He paused. And that his grandfather and I will support him either way. Robert felt a surge of emotion, recognizing the healing contained in those words. Michael was ensuring that Tyler wouldn't feel the same pressure to conform that Michael himself had felt. Good advice, Robert managed, his voice gruff with feeling. From outside came Emma's voice, calling that they were starting the bonfire and s'mores were non-negotiable. Michael smiled and gestured toward the door. Shall we? I believe we're under strict granddaughter orders. As they walked together toward the fire pit where the family was gathering, Robert thought about the document that had started it all, the will he'd nearly changed in a moment of hurt pride. How meaningless it seemed now compared to this living legacy they were creating day by day. The inheritance that truly mattered couldn't be written on paper or locked in a safe. It resided in Tyler's persistence when he fell off the paddleboard and tried again. In Emma's creativity as she designed a logo for the family's private use in their group chat. In Michael and Rebecca's collaborative leadership of the businesses. In the values, stories and connections that would endure long after Robert was gone. Near the fire, Margaret had saved seats for them. As Robert settled beside his wife, he pulled out his phone and opened the family chat. He still wasn't adept with emoji or memes, but he'd become more comfortable participating in his own way. He snapped a quick photo of the family gathered around the flames, faces illuminated in the golden light, and posted it with a simple caption, "Full circle, grateful." Saadi, the responses came immediately, hearts, thumbs up, and comments. But more meaningful than the digital reactions were the real smiles he could see on the faces around him, the living connections that no technology could fully capture or replace. As Tyler started a story about his latest school adventure, Robert put his phone away and gave his full attention to the moment. The businesses would continue to evolve. The will and trust documents would remain safely filed with Harold. The family chat would buzz with daily updates and playful banter. But the true legacy, the one that could never be removed with a keystroke or a legal amendment, was right here, gathered around a fire on a summer evening, passing stories and marshmallows from generation to generation, building connections that would endure long after the embers faded to ash.